You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Because white guys at hoops are great.
Right? So Kansas, I grew up in Lawrence, Kansas. And basically to get into KU, if you're like an in-state kid, you just need to like graduate high school, which, isn't the toughest thing ever. And I wasn't the most scholastically inclined guy. So after I took my ACT, I'm like, hey, is that a good score? And they're like, you can go to KU. And I was like, bet, I'll go to KU. And then I emailed the head strength coach there and asked if I could intern. And she told me to basically go away till I graduated college. And I had no idea, like, she was, like probably the best basketball strength and conditioning coach in the nation, Andrea Hootie. And so I just kept coming back, and she's like, you can just clean. And once you graduate, you can intern. I was like, cool. So I cleaned and whatnot to like my sophomore year. And then she had a big like staff turnover because people are getting better jobs and everything like that. And she was like, hey man, did you learn anything while you're cleaning? Like, let's get to work. And so I guess I passed and then interned for her for the next 3 or 4 years. So it was kind of cool. Left with one of the coaches for my first job. So it kind of worked out great that, I got involved in like the best basketball school in the nation. And then how I met Corey, this is kind of funny. So she was doing a clinic at KU, and she had Corey come in. She's like, hey, you got to pick up Corey from the airport, take him out to dinner, make sure he has a good time, and get him to him from the venue. And I was like, all right, sweet. And so we like met. I was like, this guy's pretty sweet. And we've been, how coaches are like, take my number if you need anything. Like, I got you. And I was like, I'm going to do that. And so a couple of years down the road, like we still stayed in touch. And when I got my first job, I was calling him because he was in the same conference as me. And I was like, yo, it's my first job. Like, what should I do? What should I do on the first day, first week? Like, how's stuff run at Conference USA compared to like Big 12, Power 5? And we've been in touch ever since. And then when this job came open at UT, I was like, bro, you got to get down here, man. You got to come to Texas. And yeah, he made it happen. And we're almost going to celebrate our 1 year anniversary together. So big time.
Now going into that, I'm going to clean up trash in the weight room internship. Basketball passion of yours growing up? Like,
yeah, so I played all through high school, but I was better at like football, rugby, and wrestling. It's like to be really good at basketball, you have to like make that your own sport. Like you can only do that pretty much for how good basketball players are now. And I'm 5'10", like I'm not towering over anybody. So in order to be a guard, 5'10", trying to play college ball, like it probably ain't happening unless it's your whole life. So I've always loved hoops. So our players will joke, like they'll see me and they're like, shoot a basketball. And I'm like, oh yeah, bet. And I'll shoot it and like, wow, you don't look awkward. You don't suck. So yeah, it's just been always a love of mine. And the fact that I get to do this every day is like pretty unbelievable.
Now, did you at all have aspirations to get into strength conditioning? Because those other sports that you were good at. Like when I think strength conditioning, and especially when I was coming up, I thought even as a hockey player, I always thought football, right? Or I always thought rugby. Like I thought, it was definitely more when we were coming up, it was strength and conditioning where that was it. It wasn't performance. It wasn't performance coaches.
Yeah.
Now we're all performance coaches and we're better off.
Bigger, stronger, faster, man. Let's go.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
But it's like, did you why the pendulum? Like, yeah, you were good at these other sports. What was it about basketball that drew you in? And rather than going to a football program, which would have been probably the first, internship, cool. Yeah, dude, we have 55 guys. Like we need help but no.
Yeah.
11 people on a roster or whatever it is, 3 years of picking up trash. Like why basketball?
I think I kind of like lucked out with like putting myself in the position to like work for a basketball strength conditioning coach. So it was like, there's 2 weight rooms there. There's a football weight room on the other side of campus and then the Olympic sports, and basketball is the main sport at Kansas. So I was interning there for so long that like for me to leave and go to football, I kind of realized what I had right there. And I was like, yo, you like basketball? Like the strength coach at the time, like she was training these guys, like they were stronger than the football guys that we worked with. And you would see these guys cleaning and snatching and doing everything that you see football players doing. But these guys are 6'10", 50-inch verticals. And I feel like the more you're around basketball players, you realize like they're the best, like, I guess, team sport athletes around. Like there's guys that play college basketball 4 years and then try out for an NFL team and make it. but there's no guys that play football 4 years and then try out for an NBA team and make it. So it's kind of this cool thing to see, like, basketball players actually train. And it was a fun environment. Like, I was definitely spoiled, didn't really know what I was in until I left, which was, a cool experience.
Yeah, because it sounds like you've had nothing but home runs when it comes to good experiences in the weight room. Like, a lot of times when even I look back on some of the stuff that I did or was a part of, or teams or organizations that I consult with, it was like everyone seems to have a story of like, yeah, dude, I don't know, it was horizontal push, horizontal pull. Everyone was benching 8 times a week. Like, it was wild. And maybe that's more of a football thing, but like, it
No, but
seems
like,
like,
it's like that everywhere. Like, you'd be amazed. Like, this basketball weight room, we had 6 force plates. We had like elite forms, which is like velocity tracking stuff on the racks. We were using like catapult, like all these things like that teams are doing now. Hootie was doing back in like 2004, 2008, with these basketball guys. So they would come in every day, jump on the force plate, have their customized workout depending on like their force signatures and all that kind of stuff. And she was doing like real time research with our exercise science department. And I thought it was like that everywhere. And the second I left and like went around the country and watched other things or talked to my other friends who were in it, I was like, you guys don't have force plates. You're not, bucketing these guys by position and body, like build and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, no, what are you talking about? Like, they're arguing over like, should we do a conjugate day or a dynamic effort day? Or are you more of, you know what I mean? And I was like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I don't even know what that stuff is. And so I was like, you don't really know what you have at that point until you go somewhere else and see like, oh my gosh, like this is like a world-class training experience.
what was the move after Kansas?
So after Kansas, one of the assistant coaches at Kansas took the head job at University of Southern Mississippi. So I went down there. I was like 22, 23, and I was the director of men's and women's basketball and volleyball. And talk about like resources difference. Like, we had a football weight room at Kansas essentially. So every guy had their own rack, like any piece of equipment, force plates, the whole 9 yards. And then I go to Southern Miss and it's a glorified janitor closet with 2 racks, some dumbbells, and no space. And so if you know anything about basketball guys, like they take up room. And so we were in this space. My desk was like a little table in the middle or the end of the weight room, which like I had to get rid of so we could put some equipment there. So like no desk, no office. And yeah, I went down there and, you don't make much your first job. So I was living in the coach's office for the first couple months till had enough money to get an apartment down there. And it was nuts. It was like, you kind of jump in being an assistant your whole life. And then you're like, I'm the director. I got to run this stuff. And so it was good to have people like Corey and Hootie to kind of lean on of like, what do I do? Like, what is this? So you made like, I feel like that's the best way to learn is like they just throw you in the fire and you adapt. And, the athletes are totally different than, lottery picks or first round draft picks. So it was definitely an interesting experience. And then from there, I went to the University of Illinois. And so it was like kind of back to the Power Five situation. I was there for like a year and a half. And then I went back to Kansas. And I thought like, all right, I'm back to Kansas, did the full circle. Like, I'm close to home. It's my alma mater. I can be done at 26 for my last strength stop. And then my boss came to Hootie at the time, came to my office like 9 months into it and was like, hey, Texas called. They want to hire you. You're leaving. So pack your stuff up. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want to do that. And she's like, yo, it's Texas. Like, you don't say no to Texas. She's like, you're going, you don't have a place here. So go. And I was like, all right. So I went there and I was just doing women's basketball. And yeah, I was like, the pressure at Texas is something totally different than any other school I've been to. Like, if you're not a top 10 team, like, you better sharpen up your resume or find something else because they don't have time for second place.
Now, at this time, you had coached men's and women's basketball, but now you're exclusively coming into Texas for women's basketball. What
Correct.
year is this when you get the Texas job?
So it's like 2000. So I just finished my 7th year. So 2017, 16, 17.
There, and I was talking about I was talking about this to a friend the other day. I remember when Title IX came out, it was an NCAA provision that had to do with, I'm sure you're familiar with it, around equality in sports, in sport scholarships at a university level. And the last 7 years of female college basketball has been the most insane skyrocketing of publicity and public interest. I know people who don't watch basketball, who only watch now women's college basketball. March Madness, like
It's crazy.
especially this last year.
Yeah.
What has that been like for you to be in the center of that universe? As it's, dude, I'm sure if they're not making a Netflix special, they're thinking about it, which they probably
They
have
need
already
to.
done. What has that been like for you to see women's college basketball from what would be considered kind of like a gradual and then all at once? Like you have a front row seat to the best in the nation. Like that must be. Are you too close to it? Can you see it? Can you sit back sometimes and be like, holy
Well, I think
fuck,
like
this?
yeah, like the biggest difference is like before there'd be like one women's game on, like 10 years ago, it'd be like if UConn and Tennessee were playing, that game would be on ESPN and there wouldn't be any other televised games on major networks at all. So like people can't see it. And throughout Title IX and viewership, like they're slowly starting to put more games on. And I think it's one of those things, like once people watch a game, then they're like, okay, I get it. This is fun. There's really good athletes. They're good at basketball. Like I have a group of buddies down here and they weren't women's basketball fans before and they came to, a game to support me. And they're like, yo, do you have tickets for the next one? Like we want to keep coming. Like these are fun. And I think when you give them the stage of like showing like these are world-class athletes playing basketball, like if you appreciate the game and being competitive and all this stuff, like you'll love women's basketball. I think the problem is people just like compare it to men's and it's like, well, that's a stupid comparison. Like you don't compare any other sport like, oh, these women's couldn't even make a high school men's team or whatever. And you're like, that's not the point of this situation at all. It's like they're really good athletes. They play at a high level and they know the game. I think people just don't view women as like hyper competitive. They just put them in this box of like, oh, they're women, whatever. But like these are some junkyard dogs out there playing back and forth. And I think this was the first year in the tournament where people saw like, yo, these players get after. I mean, there's a fight in one of the games. Like, I don't know. I love it. I think it's cool.
Now, when you came in, you already said right away, like, you're walking into a fucking, like a snake pit. You got to be like dialed. You have to perform. And that was 7 years ago. How has the pressure changed? How have you dealt with the pressure of just being in a program that just breeds excellence, in a school that breeds excellence, in a program that continues to do well? Like, did your coping mechanisms improve as the pressure increases, or has it been more difficult or easier? Like, dude, I think of jobs I don't want, and yours is like routinely at the top.
I think the cool thing is like it gives me purpose to like, some people are like, well, what's the point? Like, like we don't impact the game that much. Like, but like here, it's like you impact the game a lot. And I think the better you get, and I saw this at Kansas men's basketball, like, and winning is so ingrained in the culture. Like, if you're one of the athletes that isn't about like doing extra every day, going hard, like you're going to be kind of weeded out. And so it's like you kind of get these certain type of athletes and coaches, like the only thing on their mind is like that 1% every day. And if you're not like about that, then like you're the oddball. And it's more of like, well, if you're not doing this extra stuff and these kids want to get better, like, what are you doing here? Like, we don't have a place for you. And so I think it's cool to work with, and good as I do, like those elite athletes, like they want to work on that 1% every single day. There's no like, hey, you could take today off. They're like, no, we can do something. And so it's been fun. Like I love that high pressure situation that like everybody wants to win. Like I think a lot of schools, they just talk about winning, like, oh, it'd be great to win a national championship, but there's a difference between talking and then doing, and the doing is the most fun thing.
What you guys have such, just from a technical perspective, such an interesting load management issue. The month of March, no other sport owns a month. That is so crazy. You know what that is? That's the equivalent of like dating a chick. It's like, it's my birthday week. Like that's an insane thing for a human being to say.
Twice
and
a
in college
week
football,
every
every single's like, nope, it's our month now. You're like, what the fuck is all of March? I literally turn on any bracket shit. March 1 hits, like, oh no, it started. How do you manage? I want to know technical and tactical, because like, I've seen Corey through it. I've a handful of Ramsey, Jayhawks. Like I've seen guys go through the college basketball from a strength coach perspective. Like, what is your preparation? How do you deal with the pressure of that tournament, especially as you find yourself still playing ball at the end of March?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is like, okay, throughout the season, you're averaging like 2.5 games per week. And so it's, I don't know, it's a double-edged sword of like you have to get stuff done in practice, but also like you need to have gas at the end of the season. And so it's really important to like the whole recovery, like the best recovery protocol is an intelligently designed practice week, practice month. So like we sit down with the coaches and athletes and kind of give them an idea of like, here's where we should be peaking. Here's where it's fine to, you should be tired. Like we call them like the dog days of like December and January. Like you're playing the same conference opponent twice. You've been on the road. Like it sucks. And it's basically like brave the storm. So when March hits, like you're ready to go. And if anyone's seen like our off season and preseason, like conditioning and practice, like you'll understand why we're ready to go in March. But the biggest thing is like managing those loads throughout the week. And it's tough because like you're playing, top 25 teams week in and week out. So there's not like a game where you can be like, hey, let's rest these guys. Like in the NBA, there's like certain games where you rest people. Like you can't really do that in college. So it's like managing all those little pieces you can control, everything from like food, hydration, sleep, but like the biggest block is practice. So if you don't have a plan or vision for what the practice week should look like, you're kind of just practice into practice.
Now, walk me through the month this year. Like you guys had the biggest, like, where's your head at every game? Are you like, can you, I can't even watch some of the games, dude. I struggle to watch some of the games knowing you peripherally through Schless and following you on Instagram. I can't, dude. I'm stressing out right now.
Yeah, we're kind of a nervous wreck during like conference time. Like when it's conference tournament and everything, it's like doesn't matter how, like just win the game. Doesn't matter if we win by 1 point or 20, doesn't matter. And then like the second you get done with a game, it's like hooray, high fives. What do we have to do next? Like when's our next opponent? Who do we play? What all needs to happen in this week? And it's you just need the players to understand like there's no redos at this time of the year. Like you'll be done in the first round if you're not ready to roll. And you'll be watching the tournament from your couch. And that's the last place I want to watch March Madness.
But then win after win, like, the conversation, when going into the tournament, how confident are you that you guys are going to walk away with it?
Like the first couple rounds, like the way, like every day we practice, if you go in our gym, you'd think it was, we're practicing like it's the national championship that day. So like everything we do is like there's a competition to every single drill. There's no just drill where it's like, all right, layup lines. It's like, no, there has to be this many layups in this amount of time. If you drop the ball, we start like all this stuff. And I think if you create that competitive environment every day where you're like on edge, then when you finally get to a game, you're like, yo, we did this all the last 6 months. Like this is just another game. But it's just kind of managing, having more of an experienced group helps. If you have young players, like they're in front of 15, 20,000 people and they're just all wide eyed, not really ready to go. And so it helps when you have players that have been there before.
And then
but no, it's hectic.
Yeah. And walk me through the last couple of weeks. Like how many games are you playing? What is your, are the metrics you're tracking that are different? Are there things that you're saving recovery wise that are constraints that you leave for times like this? Like even for yourself personally, like you got to be stressed out of your goddamn mind.
Yeah. That's why I don't have any hair.
It's a strength coach look. You know what? That's why I'm not that good yet. I got to lose this. I'm still green.
You're holding on. Jeez.
Yeah.
I think, the biggest thing is like in the NCAA tournament, you play like Friday, Sunday, or Saturday, Monday. And so you have like a day off in between. And usually that practice, you can't get like you basically need to go through like tactics and everything and then get off your feet and worry about sleep, hydration. We take their phones so they're not on their phones, distracted by that kind of stuff. And we just kind of like occupy their time of like they watch so much film. They're in meetings and like we try to eliminate as many distractions as you can because a lot of these sites, like our two sites were Albany, New York, and Portland. So that's like a long trip from Austin. So we had to go to Portland, and you're there for a few days before. So you practice in a new gym, new time zone, all that kind of stuff. So, we kind of rely on our habits of like get to bed, you don't have your phone, film, eat right, and then you got to get ready to ball.
What are the biggest things that changed going from, you said you were Southern Miss?
Yeah. I think like the
What,
resources,
okay.
after games, like at Southern Miss, we'd get either Popeyes or like
Shut up.
Whataburger, right?
Shut
Yeah.
up.
And
Not
yeah, I swear
actually.
to God. Yeah, or like your
Oh,
personal
damn.
Domino's pizza, and then like you're traveling on buses, and we had to go commercial with Southern Miss, so you'd have to drive from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, 2.5 hours to New Orleans, and then get on a charter flight or get on a Southwest flight, go somewhere, bus wherever you're going, and the rooms like you're not staying at nice places, you're probably not eating the best. Like on road trips, we'd stop at like Cracker Barrel and all those kind of like road stops. And it's tough because you're like demanding a bunch from these athletes, but it's like, I'm sure it's gotten better, but it's like, hey, great game. Here's your fuel. It's a cheese or a pepperoni pizza. What do you want? And then here it's like at Texas, we can take them like a nice steak dinner night before the game, breakfast. There's a bunch of options depending on, we have a sports nutritionist, so she can sit down and be like, this is what this athlete needs for breakfast. This is what she needs for pregame, postgame. And so they have everything dialed in from that standpoint. And then recovery drinks, whatever, we got that. We stay at nice hotels, so they got good beds and everything. We charter. And so I think chartering is like the biggest advantage. It's like your road trip is 36 hours and you're just driving to the runway, get in on the plane, go there, go to the hotel, play. And these mid-major teams, like it's a whole ordeal. Like you're gone for 4 or 5 days at a stretch on bus rides. Like we took a 10-hour bus ride to Kentucky when I was there. And it's like, oh my gosh, like you're in the bus for 10 hours and then like, let's go practice. And then like, oh yeah, we need you to play really well tomorrow. And yeah, it's a grind. So like these young coaches, like their first jobs, they're just like stay in Power Five. It's like, dude, you don't get it. You got to go cut your teeth for a little bit. And the 10-hour bus ride, the Cracker Barrel at 10 p.m. Like you got to do that stuff.
That's the most Southern mixtape of random fucking food joints. There's going to be a lot of people who don't live down south who don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Yeah.
Popeyes and Cracker Barrel are like, I heard a banjo over that entire thing.
Yeah.
Like, dude. Now, how has your approach changed? Now, obviously, like the resources going from Southern Miss and maybe even wind it back to cleaning up trash in Kentucky or in Kansas, sorry, in the early days. Like, what have been the big shifts in your focus from a performance standpoint as a strength coach, ascending the ranks to the top college in the nation?
Yeah. I think when you're like younger, you're taught strength conditioning, like just get guys stronger. If you get stronger, your vertical is going to go up and your sprint time is going to get better, which is true. Like we all lifted and my deadlift went up, so therefore I can jump higher. But it's like, okay, well, like how long did it take you to jump? Like what's your RSI? Like how quickly were you able to produce force? Does that guy need strength? And what kind of boxes? Like I think as a young strength coach, I would like pat myself on the back of like, everyone can clean perfect, front squat perfectly, like, their butts on their heels. It looks great. And it's like, well, that guy might not need that. And there's probably a better exercise I can do to target that guy's lower body than back squat. And then watching them more on the court, and you kind of see how different guys, like these high operators, are super twitchy athletes. And it's like, okay, they're gifted being super twitchy. Why would I get them stronger by like compressive strategies like, back squat or like barbell bench is a thing I used to do all the time. And now I'm like, when you get really good at bench, you can't reach your head or your hand over your head. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, these guys bench a lot, but then is that affecting their shot in a bad way? And I'm like, oh God. And so, with the force plates, and then we have motion capture software so we can see them in space moving. You can kind of see like where they lack on the court. And it's usually not a power, speed, strength type situation. It's usually their inability to get into a certain position or, keep that robustness throughout the season. So it's more of, I'd say it's less like your traditional strength conditioning, like you'd normally think of. and more of like, okay, basketball's priority number one. How can I actually do stuff in the weight room to enhance their ability to be better basketball players?
Yeah, it's funny because like there's a trend. There was a trend for a long time with the emergence of sports science, like the emergence of data collection in the weight room, where people were tending to get jobs if they had a statistics background rather than an actual sport background, right? Like the one thing I've started to notice about specialist strength coaches that are doing really well in their particular sport or the particular team, is that they have such a strong relative background of the actual sport itself. Like, is that something where, like, how often are you leaning on your basketball IQ, your ability to put a ball in your hand after you lift weights? Like, how much is that experience driving some of the decisions that you make, really having a meaningful understanding of the demands of the game from a first person perspective?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that's helped me is like getting older. And so as far as like miles on my body. And so like what I used to do when I was younger is like when we first got Catapult, which is like something that tracks like workload, and it's like on the sports bra on the back of their jersey. I was like, okay, they're getting 1,000 load in practice. Like I'm going to try to do that and then see what I feel like the next day. And so I ran around, shot hoops, did that, got my 1,000 load. And then I was buried. And then the next day I was like, God, my back is killing me. My knee, like all these things. And then I'm like, I have on the lift tomorrow, like heavy ass back squat and all these other things. And I'm like, maybe there's something to this. And like the more I lifted and got like stronger, I'd find myself like when I was like probably my strongest, when I would demo stuff for my athletes, I felt like I was just like goofy doing stuff. And I'm like, the like fluidity of movement kind of went away the stronger I got. And so I'm like, if it goes away with me doing this kind of stuff, what's it going to do to these untrained athletes? Like probably not the best strategy to be doing all this. So now we focus way more on like movement. And I know it seems like common sense, like how they move in space over like chasing weight room numbers and all that kind of stuff. So I'm lucky enough to have a coach that doesn't care how much they bench and squat. Like he just needs them to play hard on the court. But yeah, it's definitely I think just seeing the force plate results and everything and different motion capture stuff, and obviously seeing the best athletes do it, you're like, maybe there's a better way besides just heavy compound movements all the time.
Do you feel like, what is the outer limit of that pendulum shift, right? Because obviously our industry is no different than anything else. Like we saw, you mentioned earlier, talking about early days, you can get guys to clean, you can get them to snatch. There was a massive influx of sports science coming out of Olympic weightlifting, and that everyone had to know how to clean. And you saw that kind of go wayside. You mentioned, it's funny because chronologically you sort of mentioned the trends as you intersected them. So then people talking about conjugate, and then somehow Westside Barbell got into college weight rooms. I'm like, who the fuck let these crazy assholes in? And then everyone had to powerlift. Everyone had to squat, bench, and dead, right? And I don't want to bucket this movement as a pendulum swing, but I know what's going to happen. I know that some cockeyed kid's going to walk in and take it too far. How do you avoid that? Because the thing that Olympic weightlifting has, and the thing that powerlifting has, that I think is very palatable to strength coaches, is, once you know the movements, it's the ease of tracking progress and the comfort that comes with that, right? With movement and this approach of being like, hey, let's not bury them. Let's not make them stiff. Let's not compress them. Comes with it, all right, now we're moving our benchmark back to where it probably should be, back to winning games. But where do you see this going off the rails? Like, where do you see this coming too far? Because I think you guys are at its infancy right now. But when the whole industry catches up, someone's going to try and be cute, and they're going to fuck it up for everyone.
Yeah, I think you got to be smart with like where your value is. And I think too many strength coaches, it's like before and after picture. Okay, the layperson can see like he put on 20 pounds, he looks jacked, he's good at his job. Oh, he took his bench from 200 to 300, he's good at his job. So I think it's this misconception of like, what do strength coaches actually do? And I think it's up to you to make your value more than just like I can get your bench up and your squat heavy and all these things, and not bashing those kind of lifts. Like how our lifts are kind of set up is like we call it like a prescription squat for the day. So if the main goal that day is like lower body strength, then we put guys in different buckets on whatever movement fits their needs the best, whether that's a back squat, Hatfield, leg press, split squat, whatever. I don't think your body really knows to that degree. But if you can put these guys in better positions to have success, I think it's going to translate to the court.
Now, when you're in a position where you've had the most amount of success, how do you maintain the status quo? Because everyone else right now in the off season is scrambling. Everyone who didn't win needs a new approach for next year, right? No one's going to go, we're going to run it back the same way that we weren't successful. Being in a position where everyone's kind of looking at you, how do you stay the course? Like how do you fight stagnation with, innovation when you're winning? Like that seems like the hardest position to be in, of like, hey, they ain't broke, don't fix it. Or like, you guys with a movement essence of like, hey, this is the reference point. This is the mile marker. We want to have these dudes, have these girls moving better. How are you walk on eggshells now that you guys are on top?
Well, I think like, so we made it to the Elite Eight. So we're like one of the final 8 teams. Like the goal is a national championship. So there's like still work to be done. So like basically on my end, I'm like, what could we have done to be in a better position? Like my best thing is like best abilities availability. So it's like, could I have got some of these players that are really good for us? They only played 20 minutes a night. Can we get it to a point where they're resilient enough to play 25, 30 minutes a night? Because at the end of the day, if your best players are out on the court more, you're going to have a better chance at winning. So we kind of look back of like, okay, what injuries were we having? What chronic stuff were we having? And then go from there. And I'm lucky enough to like share a weight room with Corey, and I can be like, hey, we had all these type of issues. What do you see me train the kids every day? Like, what are things you would add in, take away? What are some things I should look for? And he does the same thing for me. He'll be like, we have a bunch of these issues. Like, what we've done all week. Like, what would you change? What are things you've done in the past? And then I'm really good about like, someone's definitely out there doing it better than me, and I'll pick up the phone and call them and figure out like what they're doing. And I feel like with the power of social media now, like you can get in touch with any of these coaches that are doing it at a high level, and they'll help you for the most part, or at least throw ideas off of.
Do you have any interest, or maybe not do you have any interest, but what would be a sport or maybe even a particular athlete where you're like, yeah, I like ball, I love what we're doing here, but in another life, it would be dope to be able to train?
Ooh. I mean, I think where strength coaches can really like show their value is like any time sport. So like high level track and field, I think would be really cool. I think the pressure of that's unreal because it's like they either got fast or they didn't. And like on our end, it's so skill based where it's like, coach didn't get any shooters for the team, so I made them strong and in shape. But if you don't put the ball in the hole, it don't matter. You know what I mean? And track, it's like, okay, you did this plan. You knew exactly what they did in practice. You planned your weights around that, and they still got slower. So whose fault is it or whatever? I don't know. I think the pressure of that would be nuts. And like, what's bigger pressure than like Olympic gold or going after, once every 4 years you have a chance? It's not, you lost Friday, you can play again Tuesday. Like, it's 4 years, and maybe that athlete doesn't have another 4 years in them. Like I don't know. That's high pressure right there for sure.
Is there one that you would steer away from, that if someone calls and goes, hey, we got a job for you at that click, and you're just hanging up? Like, no chance. I'm not stepping into that.
Probably swimming. I can't relate to swimming at all. I can't really swim. I don't know. Probably swimming. But yeah, like probably track or rugby would be fun just because I played rugby, and like any of those like combat sports I think would be fun just because those guys are psychos and training is like in their culture. I think you'd have to battle some things though with like MMA and stuff, just of like tradition of how we always done things. You're kind of probably fighting some of the old school, coaching of we've always cut weight this way. We've always strength train this way. Yeah, I think any of those sports would be cool.
Does female basketball have that? Now it's all you represent almost like an unusual cohort that like hasn't really come across as much bullshit as a strength coach who's been doing it for as long as you have might, in just lesser programs with lesser coaches at the helm. But what are the stigmas around, because certainly there are legacy pieces of early days female basketball strength training. Like what are the things that in the weight room that 9 times out of 10, that's not, if it's not Texas, you're like, they're doing this because they still think X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is like the misconception with conditioning. And so a lot of coaches, it's like, I remember my first job, the women's coach, it was like a 2 mile conditioning test. They had to just run 2 miles in like under, I don't know, 20 minutes, 18 minutes, something like that. And I remember being like, well, this has nothing to do with basketball. And I went to her office and was like, had all these research studies on like why we shouldn't do this. We should do it a different way. I was at Kansas. We won a national championship. This is how we did our conditioning. And she was like, yo, I don't care about your research papers, any of that. She's like, I've done this longer than you've been alive. And, I know it's not basketball specific, but for me, it's if you're tough enough to run hard for 20 minutes, any of these athletes should be able to do that. Then that's the kind of kid I want to go to war with. And I was like, all right, like I don't necessarily agree, but you have a reason why you do it. And you recognize it's not sports specific. And so, yeah, we're gonna go with it. So I think as a strength coach, you kind of have to know your role of like what things are worth fighting for and what things are, it's like, all right, no one's going to die. Is it going to be that big of a deal if they have to run for 18 minutes straight? Like, probably not. And so you kind of have to pick your battles on, what you're willing to do and not willing to do.
Is that something that you run into? Like, it's funny. When I saw Corey the other day, and toughness was something that he kept on referring to as a commonly cited attribute of basketball players, or something that is projected as a tangible thing, albeit extremely intangible and multifactorial. I, as someone who can't play basketball, I wouldn't be able to touch a rim if I had a ladder. I just couldn't do it. I don't ever think, and this is probably wrong of me to say this out loud, I don't ever think as a very outsider, if you were to ask me about toughness in sports, basketball never comes to mind. But it seems like in the conversations I've had, and even that example of like, hey, yeah, I would need them to be able to run hard because I need people who are, maybe mentally tough enough to push themselves to that level. How often do you find yourself, dealing with the subjective interpretation of toughness as a physical or mental attribute of basketball players?
Man, I hate it in general. Just the new trend is like toughness. And it's like, well, what's your metric for toughness? And it's like, until I can put like a metric to it, then it's like, I notice with some coaches, like Jordan's tough today. Oh, he's soft tomorrow. Like they can be tough and soft in the same practice. And it's like, okay, what are we calling toughness and how are we measuring it? And then my biggest thing is it's like, I think your culture and your attitude of your team stems from like the coaches around it, especially like the head coach. So if like the head coach isn't tough themselves, like you're going to breed quote unquote like weaker minded athletes. But if you have a tough, hard nosed coach, like chances are, the athletes are going to have to, either get with the program or find another spot. And so I think if coaches want to put blame on toughness, I think they need to look in the mirror and figure out, what are your standards for toughness? And then why aren't these athletes doing what you want?
Yeah. Speaking of standards, dealing with the collegiate level is super interesting because you're dealing with people that are still developing. When you get to pros, they're like, I don't know, people are kind of like done. This is you now for the rest of your life. Like, how have you noticed coming in, like the entry level stock of, in the female basketball world specifically, like what have been the big changes in your career that you've noticed of like, hey, coming out of high school, we are now seeing these attributes in athletes that we weren't seeing before, whether positive or negative?
I think, I don't know, it's like kind of multi-layered. Like when you're at like a mid-major, you're usually like an undersized kid who like loves the sport. So you're just 2 inches too short. You got something to prove. There's usually like tougher kids there. Like they weren't the best player on their high school team. They had to be the underdog, probably play second fiddle to whoever was going to Texas or KU or wherever. And some of these kids you get in these bigger institutions, like they're the best player in the country or best player in the region or state. And chances are, if you're the best player in your state, your high school coach probably isn't getting on you as much as the third or fourth best player on your team. You know what I mean? They're like, man, as long as Jordan shows up, gets on the bus, we got a chance. So don't mess with him. He's fine. And the competition you're playing against, it's guys like me guarding you. And some games you might not have to bring it, or you can play 80% and still be the best player, in your state. And so it's like you leave that environment and you come to Texas or another big school, and all of a sudden every guy there is just as big of a deal as you are, except they have 2 or 3 years of college experience. And I think it's these kids that lean into the coaching the soonest and realize they can take feedback. It's not personal. We're trying to help you. Like our best interest is for you to have a great career. And we know how to do it. We've worked with plenty of athletes that are just like you. And so it's like, take the feedback and then realize that you're going to have to put in way more work than you did in high school. So in college, like showing up to weights in practice, that's just a requirement to be on the team. And then after that, it's like, what are you willing to do outside of your hours required to take yourself to the next level?
Now, preparing them for what goes on, you kind of terraformed like this is what this is the pedigree that you have coming in. There's another level beyond college now that year over year is growing leaps and bounds. What is, as players are outbound, as players are going into the professional ranks, like what is the preparation process? What are the words of wisdom? What is the new challenge? What's different about the pro ranks and the college ranks?
So we got a couple good things we do here, I think. So this new group of athlete, like they want to know the why on everything. And so like I wanted to be a teacher before I knew strength conditioning was an actual job. And so our athletes kind of give me shit because we'll have the lift up for today. I explain why you're doing this exercise. This is why she's going light today. This is why she's going heavy. Here's why conditioning is this way. And so these athletes kind of get it ingrained in their mind of like, we call it like taking ownership of your personal development. And so my goal is like, once you leave after 4 or 5 years, if you go to the WNBA, you can tell your strength coach what you need and what's worked in the past. And so you're not leaving here with just like, oh, can you send me a workout? Like, I don't know what to do. It's like, oh, I know that for lower body day, I need to do single leg stuff because that'll help with whatever, XYZ. And then a cool thing that we have is like Austin's a location city. Like people want to come back to Austin. So our pros, like from NBA to WNBA, will come back in the summer and train, and they'll do open gym with these athletes, and they'll see like, oh my gosh, like I have like Kevin Durant comes and trains, and our men's players are like, oh, Kev's in here 12 hours a day shooting and lifting twice a day, and I can't seem to make it to an extra round of shooting during the day. Do I really want to be an NBA player? Or we had a player a couple years ago. She was WNBA Defensive Player of the Year. And so she would come in our open gyms and guard our best player. And she was like, okay, so this is what it's going to be like. I'm going to need to get quicker. I'm going to need to get better handles. I'm going to have to know the game better if I really, truly want to go to the next level. So I think it's one of those things like you don't get it till you see it or till that person's guarding you. And you're like, oh, okay, this is different than college.
Now, from your perspective as a college strength coach, if the phone were to ring at the pro level, what are you weighing out of pros and cons? Like, what advantages do college programs have in like the realm of physical development, whether it's logistics, whether it's schedule, whether it's even just the age of the athletes? Like, would there be trepidation or like, yo, I'm out the door, I'm going to the NBA or going to the WNBA, or you'd be like, yo, we got a good thing here?
Yeah, I think it's like, I've never been to the NBA, so I can only speak to what I've heard from other friends and coaches, but like college, it's like these guys, at least not yet, they don't have their own strength coach or guy that I have to compete against as far as like, hey, I know they're having you do this. This is what you should do. Um, and it's kind of like, I guess we have more control over their schedules and what we're doing throughout the thing. It's more of like a team. Like if you come in as a freshman, like we plan to have you for 4 or 5 years. And I think you don't really have to, like, I guess now with players in NIL, they're going to be making more than we are. But before that, like, if you're the strength coach trying to get an NBA All-Star to do this exercise and he makes $100 million and he's the franchise player and he has a problem with you, like they're just going to find a new version of you, like someone else with the weight room keys, whatever. And so I think you have to be good at your soft skills as far as like, how can I sell this athlete on this is the prescription they need to be doing for this day. Also, like, I mean, it's almost like it's damn near professional sports now, because what we're running into now is like athletes are getting paid. So, they can outsource nutrition. They can get whatever meals they want. They can buy these supplements and recovery stuff for their own dorm rooms. So it's a whole new ball game now. And then college, obviously the travel isn't as crazy as the NBA. Like some of the stories Corey was telling me, he's like, yeah, I was gone for 2 weeks. I'm like, 2 weeks? Like that's nuts. So they got like 87 games. And so, it's just a different animal.
Does in some ways, like not with NIL and the fact that they're getting paid and they have all of this freedom, albeit, I think a net positive, giving the athletes more control. Does the culture that you guys coach in, does it still supersede the potential problems of money being injected into the college programs? Like, do you ever see it being the difficulties of pros just with younger kids? Like if kids are starting to make this exorbitant amount of money, or do you see like, no, we got pros that come back that train with us. The culture is so that regardless of these kids are making 10 mil a year, they're still going to be in the program for reasons other than money. Like it's built on excellence. Or do you foresee this like, oh fuck, like this is really going to change things for us in the next couple of years?
I think it'll definitely change things. I'm not sure to what extent, but I mean, it's essentially a free market every year. So it used to be like, if you got on our team, like we don't have to keep recruiting you because you're on the team. You know what I mean? But now we have to worry about like, you have a great year and then so-and-so up the street wants to double whatever money you're getting from us. And, you can't blame these kids because like if anyone's going to pay me double, like it'd be really tough for me not to move on to the next deal. So yeah, it's tricky. And I think just putting, safeguards in them for like how to handle your money. All these, they have more access to people than they ever did before. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a new landscape for everybody, but it's new for everybody.
With the notoriety now, especially around female basketball, has it been difficult to navigate the celebrity status that comes along now? That, very rarely was that a thing just due to the lack of publicity, like you said, right? Like, maybe a UConn game got aired if they were playing, and then now it's like people like jersey sales and autographs and like memorabilia and all of this stuff. Like, how has that part of the athlete experience intersected with your job, or have you recognized like the change in just that these guys and girls are public figures now?
Yeah, I think it's tough because like before, like 15 years ago, if you had a bad game, there might be like a 30-second clip on Sports Center and maybe a small little paragraph in the paper. And that was it. News cycle done. And now, like with social media, everyone, if you have a bad game, there can be a whole thread and memes about you and comments from people that like don't, like off the wall stuff. And I mean, we both have social media. When people write dumb stuff send you a DM or on one of your posts, like you're a functioning adult and it probably irks you too. And so it's like, if it's irking us now, like what's an 18-year-old? And then on the opposite end, like you have a really good couple games and everyone thinks you're, the next coming of Michael Jordan or whatever, like how do you keep that in check? And looking back at myself as an 18-year-old, if I don't know how I'd be able to handle that. I'd hope I'd be able to, but I mean, it's a different ball game. Like I don't know if they're necessarily equipped unless they have a good network around them to help silence whether it's positive or negative.
Now, like at Texas, you're the first that I've heard of the taking of the cell phones. I'm assuming this is again bred into the culture, and there is an understanding that everything is done for the best of the player. But I can't help but think, like my experience is primarily with college football players going into the NFL. They would have burner cells, they would have VPNs. I could not imagine trying to peel, even pros could not imagine trying to peel a cell phone out of the hand of any kid I've ever put through a combine prep, any kid that I've ever worked with gone into the league. Like that good and bad, that publicity is addictive. What is that process like when you actually, all right, we're in, you said Portland or you're on out in New York, like phones in the fucking bucket.
I think like it's one of those things, like it's kind of the honor system. Like they all have iPads, laptops, all that kind of stuff. So like we know they're probably messaging or surfing the web or whatever, but it's kind of sets the tone of like, hey, this is what we want. Like give us your phones. It should be the only time you're using your iPad is homework or film. And it kind of puts them in this mindset of like, okay, now it's time to focus. Like granted, they can get around that. But it's kind of one of those situations. It's like the honor system. Like if you like a photo and your phone's already in or put something on your story or whatever, like, come on, like, what are we trying to do? And I think with a lot of these athletes, if you just level with them and they're like, hey, this is the reason, we're not just being jerks to take your phone away, but like, I don't need somebody calling you at 3 a.m. or an alarm going off or you watching YouTube on your phone till 3 in the morning. Like, let's be focused and, lock in. And I think there's kind of a mutual understanding of this means it's time to focus. So it's like, all right, it's all fun and games. Turn in your phone the next 12 hours. Like it needs to be basketball related.
Now, with the success you had this year, what is on the horizon to be adopted? What is like, all right, final 8, we won a national championship. We want a national championship. The big rocks we need to move this year are X, Y, and Z.
I think the biggest thing, we have like an older group. So it's more of like the tactical side of stuff. Like obviously we need to get better at, your basic shooting, dribbling, passing, whatever. But I think the more athletes lean into this tactical side of like watching film, watching basketball and figuring out like, hey, on this particular play, like we wanted the screen at the elbow, but you set it too high, at the top of the arc. And this is why the play screwed up. Or if you recognize, hey, the defense is starting to play like this, shade in on this area or go to this block. And kind of, the best football players, like how much film do they watch? Like they already know what the defense is doing before they even do it. And so you kind of, especially like our point guards, the more they can watch film and pick up on like what other defenses are trying to do to us or what we want to try to do them defensively, I think it helps slow the game down for them and they can understand basketball and concepts more than just like, I need to run play A. And if they stop play A, like, oh, I'm screwed. But it's like, okay, I understand the concept of what we're trying to run and let's go from there. So I think you'll see this a lot in older players in the NBA. Like they can't rely on their physical skills like they used to. And so it's like, okay, I need to be a smarter player. And so it's like, okay, this can be something we work on in your downtime because it requires no energy besides you sitting in front of your iPad. And let's work on the tactical side of the game.
Now, what about you personally? Like, you're in a position that a lot of aspiring strength coaches want to be in, right? You're part of a winning pedigree at a great school, a great organization with teams that are perennially doing really well. How do you, where do you look in the off season? What are things that you're looking at to improve you as a coach? Like, how do you, I mean, great job, man. But like at a certain point, because I mean, you again, you don't want to fuck up what you've done, but at the same time, you didn't get to where you're at by just kind of sitting back and like, great job.
Yeah, I think the big thing I'm diving into this year is like kind of like shooting analytics. So I don't know if Corey shared this with you, but like we're working with one of our NBA professors, he does statistics for the NBA. So he does every kind of stat there is out there. He wrote a book called Sprawl Ball. But he'll send us reports of like, when you have these 5 players, then you have the highest winning percentage. This player should shoot this shot at this time of the game. And as the game goes on, she needs to shoot on this side of the court because she's better on that side. And right now we're doing like it's like 20 camera motion capture. So these kids will come in and shoot. And then from there, we can break down like limb by limb, segment by segment, like how are they missing? Are they always missing short and to the right? Okay, if they're always missing short and to the right, what's going on? Can they not rotate? Can they not get full extension when they shoot? And I think those are some things that Corey and I are playing around with, like how can we impact their shot? And so it's like, okay, if they lack, shoulder or internal rotation, like what are things we can do to either take away or put into their program to help with that? Or they can't rotate. Okay, what are things we should put in or take away to help with that facet of their game?
Can I get this guy's number? I know it's probably super insensitive, but like, this guy sounds like an ace in the hole for sports. Like, this guy, I would check this guy's like credit card statements. This guy's just betting on games.
His name's Kurt Goldsberry, and he wrote a book called Sprawl Ball. But he takes, I think he's writing another book as well. But he takes like every stat imaginable, and compiles it into these forms, and then what we found, this was kind of funny, our best starting 5, one of the players that was in that starting 5, probably basketball wise, wasn't one of probably even our top 8 players, but they just had this way of like doing all these intangible things that you can't really get a stat on. So every time they were in the game, our like point differential was always way better than when they were out. And that's like one of those things, if you look at everybody and they're like, well, they don't score as much or this, but it's like, oh, they do all these other things that lead to winning. At the end of the day, like winning is the most important thing. So if, when they're in your lineup and you have the highest winning percentage, like they better play a lot.
You have a Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer of a basketball player on your team.
Basically.
Oh, yo, that guy's got to dab up that professor with like 100 and be like, yo, thanks.
Yeah,
appreciate
it. Thanks. Keep those stats coming.
Jesus. That's wild, man. Well, I mean, I guess, it's small hinges open big doors, right? And
well, it's like intangible stuff. Like there's no stat on someone being in the right position or getting a key steal or being in the right spot to get a rebound. Like there's no stats for that. And, some players with motors, they're just gamers, man.
Yeah, that's fun, man. And it's good to hear that, like, at the top level, because I think one of the things that is really mystifying for a lot of young strength coaches is when, as they ascend the ranks, there's a lot of artifacts of strength and conditioning coaches that got a job because they dated the owner's daughter or whatever, and he's just embedded. Like, you're gonna have to burn the weight room down to get some of these guys out of professional leagues. And I got a message the other day from a professional baseball team, a guy who was just like, dude, I don't know if I can do it. Like, I work in the minors. If I stick around for another year, I'll probably get the major league bid. But I'm getting chewed out right now for push-pull ratios. And I'm like, dog, like, what year is it? And there's a lot of nepotism and there's a lot of ancient, do it because that's the way we've done it mentality. So it's cool to hear that even after all the success that you've had, that there's still like, no, we still got to figure it out. And if we got to grab the fucking nerd from the stats department to come in here with our cameras and figure it out, we're going to fucking figure it out.
Well, it's great. Like my mentor, I got so lucky with Andrea Hootie that like, okay, she's won, I think 9 or 10 national championships in basketball, won like 30 conference championships. She has over 80 guys in the NBA. And if anyone could just chill and do their same program from 2008 every year, probably be her. No one's going to question. But the fact that like right now she's getting her doctorate, and it's like, she doesn't need to get her doctorate. And the way she runs her weight room, it's like there's statisticians in there that aren't even want to be strength coaches. They just love numbers, and they're, machine learning all these different things of all the data they get to try to, get that extra 1%. I'm like, if she's in year 30 of her career, still trying to get the 1%, then like, what am I doing? Just relying on, well, last year, this is what we did. We're going to do the same program. And it's like, that's not it.
Yeah, no, man, I appreciate the attention to detail, and I plan on picking up more than 1% when I come and bother you guys in July.
Yeah, you got to come down.
Yeah, man, I got a plan. I was talking to the other day. I'm just like, I'm just blocking off all of July. I'm just going to sit around and wait for a call and then just come down and play. So, but no, dude, I appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate you kind of letting the insights. We get a lot of strength coaches that listen, and it's always good to hear like kind of the Domino's, pizza, Popeyes, Cracker Barrel, just the ascent to the top. So keep climbing, man. I appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome, man.